Imagine standing inside a small Taoist workshop in China over 1,000 years ago. The air smells of smoke and strange minerals. Shelves are lined with jars of mysterious powders. Around you, a group of alchemists isn't trying to build a weapon. They believe they're only one experiment away from discovering the secret to eternal life. Then suddenly, the mixture erupts in a violent burst of fire. Beards are singed. The workshop fills with smoke. And in a single, unexpected moment, history quietly changes forever. The most influential weapon humanity would ever create didn't begin on a battlefield. It began as a failed attempt to defeat death. And the journey from that accidental explosion to the first true gun is far more astonishing than most people realize. At first, nobody called it gunpowder. To the alchemists who created it, it was simply another experiment. Another strange mixture. Another hopeful step toward immortality. Inside clay bowls, they combined three ordinary ingredients: charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. Each one looked harmless on its own: black powder, yellow crystals, white grains that seemed no more dangerous than ordinary salt. But when heated together, something extraordinary happened. The charcoal provided fuel. The sulfur helped the mixture ignite quickly. And saltpeter released oxygen, feeding the fire so rapidly that the expanding gases had nowhere to go. Instead of burning slowly, the mixture exploded, not because it contained magic, but because chemistry had accidentally discovered a new way to release enormous energy in an instant. The early Chinese called it fire medicine, an oddly fitting name. It wasn't originally intended to kill anyone. In fact, its earliest uses were surprisingly peaceful. It filled the night sky with dazzling fireworks during religious festivals. It produced brilliant flashes that amazed crowds and frightened away evil spirits. Soldiers even packed it into simple smoke bombs and signal devices to communicate across battlefields. At this point, gunpowder was more spectacle than weapon. It entertained. It celebrated. It signaled. No one yet imagined a machine capable of throwing metal across a battlefield with explosive force. But history has a habit of changing when someone asks a single dangerous question. If this powder can launch sparks into the sky, what else could it launch? That simple thought would transform a colorful festival invention into one of the most influential technologies ever created. And the first person to answer that question didn't build a gun. They built something far stranger, a spear that breathed fire. The first gun didn't look like a gun. It looked like a spear. Imagine standing on a battlefield in China nearly 1,000 years ago. Soldiers grip long wooden spears, just as warriors had done for centuries. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. Then, one soldier lowers the tip toward the enemy, and suddenly, a roaring stream of fire erupts from the side of the weapon. Smoke fills the air. Flames shoot forward. The sound alone is enough to make men hesitate. This strange invention became known as the fire lance. Its design was surprisingly simple. Craftsmen tied a small bamboo tube filled with gunpowder to the shaft of a traditional spear. When ignited, the burning powder blasted flames, sparks, and burning fragments several feet ahead of the weapon. It wasn't especially accurate. It wasn't especially powerful. And it certainly wasn't the unstoppable firearm we imagine today. But it did something no weapon had ever done before. It terrified people. For centuries, soldiers had understood arrows, swords, and spears. They knew how to defend against steel. They had never seen a weapon that breathed fire. On chaotic battlefields, fear could be just as valuable as raw killing power. A single burst of flame could break an enemy's formation before the two sides even collided. But human curiosity never stops at good enough. Before long, someone asked another dangerous question. If burning powder can throw fire, could it throw something solid? Small stones were dropped into the bamboo tube, then broken pieces of pottery, then scraps of metal. Each experiment pushed the invention one step closer to becoming something entirely new. The fire lance was no longer just a frightening spear. It was slowly evolving into the world's first true firearm, and that transformation would change warfare forever. The fire lance had one enormous weakness. It was unpredictable. Sometimes it blasted a terrifying jet of flame. Sometimes it sputtered. And sometimes the bamboo tube exploded in the soldier's own hands. The problem wasn't the gunpowder. It was the weapon itself. Bamboo was light, cheap, and easy to make. but it simply couldn't withstand the incredible pressure created when burning powder tried to launch something solid at high speed. So craftsmen did what humans have always done when faced with a problem. They experimented. Instead of bamboo, they began casting short tubes from bronze. Unlike wood, bronze could survive the explosion inside without bursting apart. Suddenly, the expanding gases had only one direction to go: forward, and whatever sat inside the barrel, whether it was a stone, a metal pellet, or a simple lead ball, was violently hurled toward the target. Without realizing it, these craftsmen had crossed one of the most important technological thresholds in history. The weapon no longer relied on flames to frighten an enemy. Now, the explosion itself became the engine that launched a projectile. This was the birth of the hand cannon. By modern standards, it was crude. It was heavy, slow to reload, wildly inaccurate, and dangerous even for the person firing it. But history rarely changes because something is perfect. It changes because something is good enough to begin improving. The hand cannon proved one revolutionary idea. Gunpowder could do far more than create fire. It could throw metal with unstoppable force. From that moment on, every inventor who picked up the design asked the same question. How do we make it shoot farther, faster, sauvage, more reliably? And while China invented the first gun, it would be an empire stretching across 2 continents that carried this idea to the rest of the world, changing warfare forever. Inventing the first gun was only half the story. An invention hidden inside one country can change very little. An invention that travels can change the world. In the early 13th century, a new power erupted from the vast grasslands of Mongolia. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire expanded with astonishing speed, eventually becoming the largest contiguous empire in history. Wherever the Mongols rode, they carried more than soldiers. They carried knowledge, engineers, craftsmen, weapons. Entire technologies moved alongside their armies. Chinese specialists who understood gunpowder were often captured or recruited, taking their skills westward across Central Asia and into the Islamic world. From there, merchants, scholars, and military engineers continued spreading these ideas farther than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a chain reaction. One city shared knowledge with another. One army copied the weapons of its enemy. One craftsman improved what another had built. By the time gunpowder reached Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries, it wasn't viewed as an exotic curiosity. It was seen as an opportunity. European metalworkers, already skilled at casting church bells and bronze cannons, immediately began experimenting with stronger barrels, better projectiles, and more reliable designs. The invention itself hadn't changed. The people using it had. And that changed everything. History often celebrates the inventor, but just as important is the messenger. Without trade routes, conquest, and cultural exchange, gunpowder might have remained a remarkable Chinese invention known only in East Asia. Instead, it became humanity's invention, and nowhere would its impact be more dramatic than in medieval Europe, where a simple metal tube would soon challenge armored knights, towering castles, and an entire way of fighting that had dominated for centuries. When gunpowder reached Europe, something unexpected happened. The Europeans didn't simply copy the Chinese designs. They reinvented them. For centuries, medieval warfare had been ruled by one symbol above all others: the armored knight, covered from head to toe in steel, mounted on a powerful horse, and trained from childhood. A knight was the ultimate weapon of his age. Ordinary soldiers with swords or spears had little chance against him. Armor was security. Armor was status. Armor was power. Then gunpowder arrived. The earliest European hand cannons were crude. They were little more than short iron or bronze tubes attached to wooden stocks. Lighting them required a burning fuse, and firing them was slow, inaccurate, and often dangerous. Yet they possessed one terrifying advantage. A lead ball traveling at tremendous speed didn't care how expensive your armor was. It struck with a force that steel had never been designed to stop. Suddenly, generations of military tradition were thrown into question. A peasant with a simple firearm could threaten a warrior who had spent decades mastering the sword. The battlefield was beginning to change. And it wasn't just soldiers who noticed. Castle builders did too. For hundreds of years, towering stone walls had protected kings and nobles from attack. But larger gunpowder weapons, early cannons, could gradually smash through defenses that had once seemed indestructible. Military engineers responded with lower, thicker walls and entirely new fortress designs. One invention was now reshaping everything around it: weapons, armor, architecture, even social class. But despite its revolutionary power, the gun still suffered from one frustrating flaw. Every shot required a burning match. And fire has a habit of going out. The next breakthrough wouldn't make the bullet stronger. It would make the gun itself finally reliable, and that simple improvement would change warfare once again. The gun had already changed history, but it still had one frustrating weakness. Before every shot, the soldier needed an open flame. Imagine standing in the rain. Your match burns out. The gun becomes useless. For centuries, inventors weren't trying to make guns more powerful. They were trying to make them fire every time. The first breakthrough was the matchlock. A slow-burning cord was clamped into a simple mechanical arm. Pull the trigger, and the glowing match lowered into a small pan of gunpowder, igniting the charge inside the barrel. For the first time, soldiers no longer had to hold the burning fuse by hand. It was a clever solution, but it created a new problem. A burning match was impossible to hide at night. Rain could extinguish it. Wind could blow away the spark. And carrying lit cords around barrels of gunpowder was never a comforting idea. So European inventors asked another question. What if the gun could make its own spark? The answer was the wheel lock. Instead of a burning cord, a spinning steel wheel scraped against pyrite, throwing hot sparks into the priming powder. It worked beautifully. But beauty came at a cost. The mechanism was incredibly complex, expensive to build, and difficult to repair. Only wealthy nobles could afford such weapons. So the search continued. Eventually came the flintlock. A simple piece of flint struck hardened steel, creating reliable sparks with far fewer moving parts. Cheaper, faster, more dependable. Each new design solved one problem left behind by the last. That is how most great inventions evolve. Not through a single moment of genius, but through hundreds of people fixing hundreds of small mistakes. Yet even the flintlock wasn't the final answer. One tiny metal cap smaller than a coin would soon transform firearms into the reliable weapons that reshaped the modern world. By the early 19th century, firearms had become faster and more reliable than ever before. Yet they still depended on one fragile ingredient: loose gunpowder. Rain could soak it, wind could scatter it. Even a slight mistake while loading could cause the weapon to misfire. The next revolution wouldn't come from a bigger barrel or a stronger bullet. It would come from something small enough to fit on the tip of your finger. The percussion cap. At first glance, it looked almost insignificant. A tiny copper cap containing a small amount of shock-sensitive explosive. But its impact was enormous. Instead of relying on sparks landing in exposed powder, a hammer now struck the cap directly. The cap exploded instantly. That explosion ignited the main gunpowder charge inside the barrel. Simple, fast, reliable. For soldiers, the difference was dramatic. Guns fired more consistently in rain, wind, and cold weather. Misfires became far less common. Loading became quicker. Confidence on the battlefield increased. For the first time, firearms were dependable enough to become the standard weapon of modern armies. And once reliability improved, innovation accelerated. Inventors quickly combined percussion caps with new ideas: rifled barrels that dramatically improved accuracy, metallic cartridges that united the bullet, powder, and primer into a single unit, and repeating mechanisms that allowed multiple shots without constant reloading. Each improvement built directly upon the one before it. No single inventor transformed the gun overnight. Progress came one small solution at a time. Looking back, it's almost unbelievable. One tiny metal cap, barely larger than a coin, helped unlock the age of modern firearms. But perhaps the most surprising part of this story isn't how guns became so advanced. It's realizing that no one ever truly invented the gun at all. When people ask who invented the gun, they expect a name. A single genius. One brilliant moment. One revolutionary invention. History almost never works that way. There was no ancient version of Thomas Edison standing in a workshop declaring, "The gun is finished." Instead, there were thousands of anonymous craftsmen scattered across continents and centuries. A Taoist alchemist accidentally created gunpowder. A Chinese engineer tied a bamboo tube to a spear. A metal worker replaced bamboo with bronze. A soldier discovered that metal balls flew farther than stones. Mongol armies carried the technology across Asia. European blacksmiths strengthened the barrels. Inventors designed the matchlock. Others replaced it with the wheel lock. Then came the flintlock. Finally, the percussion cap solved the last major weakness. Each generation inherited an unfinished idea. Each generation asked a simple question. What's the biggest problem with this design? Then they fixed it. Not perfectly, just a little better. That pattern should feel familiar, because it's the same way airplanes evolved, the same way computers evolved, the same way smartphones evolve today. The inventions that reshape civilization are rarely created overnight. They're built one improvement at a time, one mistake corrected, one weakness removed, one clever idea added to another. Looking back, the gun wasn't really a single invention. It was an 800-year conversation between inventors who would never meet. Each person unknowingly completed one small piece of a puzzle that someone else had started centuries before. And perhaps that's the greatest surprise of all. The story of the gun isn't really about weapons. It's about how human curiosity, shared knowledge, and countless tiny improvements can slowly transform the entire course of civilization. Now, let's return to where this story began. A quiet workshop. 3 simple ingredients. A group of Taoist alchemists searching for eternal life. They weren't trying to conquer kingdoms. They weren't designing weapons. They weren't imagining battlefields filled with smoke. They simply wanted to defeat death. Instead, they created a force that would redefine war, politics, engineering, and the balance of power across the world. That may be the greatest irony in the history of invention. The gun was never born from a single flash of genius. It emerged through centuries of accidents, curiosity, experimentation, and countless small improvements. One person discovered an explosive mixture. Another attached it to a spear. Another strengthened the barrel. Another invented a better firing mechanism. Another solved the problem of unreliable ignition. Generation after generation, each inventor added one small piece to a puzzle they would never see completed. And that pattern extends far beyond firearms. The greatest technologies in human history rarely appear fully formed. They evolve. One question leads to one solution. That solution creates a new problem. The next generation solves that problem, and the cycle begins again. In many ways, the history of the gun is really the history of human curiosity itself, a reminder that civilization is not built in giant leaps. It is built through thousands of tiny steps, each one resting on the discoveries of those who came before. Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden inside this story. History is often changed, not by people who set out to transform the world, but by ordinary people trying to solve an ordinary problem. If those Taoist alchemists had actually discovered the secret to eternal life instead of gunpowder, would human history have followed a completely different path, or would another accidental discovery have changed the world just the same?